He stood at the threshold of a place he once called home. But now he was just a ghost, seeking one last mercy. Outside, the rain poured down like frozen needles, soaking through his worn military jacket. Water dripped from the hem of his coat, forming small puddles at his feet, through the large glass doors of the Sterling Rose Hotel. Warm yellow light spilled out, illuminating his weathered face. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars fallen to earth. The gentle laughter of elegantly dressed guests echoed outward, contrasting sharply with the cold silence of the night. For a fleeting moment, he remembered young hands, unscarred, dancing across ivory piano keys, the sound of music, pure and beautiful, filled with hope. But that was long ago. Now his hands were rough and trembling, bearing the scars of time and suffering. What he was about to ask would expose the truth about everyone in that room, including himself. But first, they would have to see past the rags to recognize the man beneath. James Mitchell took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. He pushed open the door and stepped into a world that had long forgotten him. Or so he thought. Inside the grand dining hall of the Sterling Rose Hotel was another world entirely. This was where power, money, and privilege blended into a perfect symphony. 150 guests, the city's wealthiest and most influential, had gathered to celebrate 5 decades of the hotel's success. Massive crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the soaring ceiling, each one like a waterfall of light cascading down, making the expensive gowns and tailored suits shimmer. Luxury perfumed the air, French fragrances, gourmet cuisine from the kitchen, and imported champagne. The sound was an orchestra of achievement-soft laughter, the tinkling of crystal glasses, smooth jazz playing in the background. At the center of the room, like a precious jewel in a crown, stood a grand piano. Its glossy black surface reflected the chandelier light, creating shimmering streaks of brilliance. This wasn't just any instrument. It was a masterpiece, a symbol of art and luxury. On a small platform near the piano stood Victoria Brennan, 45 years old, wearing a form-fitting red evening gown, her black hair pulled up in perfect elegance. Victoria was the embodiment of success and control. She owned everything the eye could see: this hotel, this empire, this triumph. And tonight, she was telling the story of how it was built. Her voice rang out, clear and confident. She spoke of her father's dream 50 years ago, his vision to create not just a hotel but a symbol, a place representing absolute excellence, a place for those who deserved it most. She paused, letting her words settle in the air. The crowd applauded softly. Nodding in agreement, Victoria continued, explaining her father's belief in standards of quality, of service, and of the people they served. Sterling Rose wasn't for everyone, she said. It was for those who had earned their place through hard work, success, and contribution to society. She turned to the piano, a gentle smile crossing her face. This piano, she said, her voice softening slightly, was her father's favorite instrument. He used to say that music was the language of civilization, separating humanity from barbarism. The crowd fell quiet, listening with respect. Victoria's voice grew firmer. She was thrilled to announce their newest project expanding Sterling Rose. They would demolish the outdated lower district and build a new, modern hotel wing. They would transform that dark spot into a beacon of progress. Applause erupted, enthusiastic and unanimous. No one objected. No one asked about the families who would lose their homes. No one thought about the lives that would be disrupted. To them, the lower district was just real estate waiting to be exploited. But just then, a figure appeared from the direction of the kitchen. James Mitchell had slipped in through the back door. Passing through the staff area where the smell of food and the clatter of pans created their own symphony. One of the young chefs, Marcus Chen, 28 years old with kind eyes, had noticed the old man passing through. Marcus felt uneasy watching his colleagues laugh and point at this poorly dressed man. The old man didn't belong here. Everyone knew it. But something about the way he moved, cautious yet unafraid, observant yet not begging, kept Marcus watching. James stepped into the grand dining room. His appearance was a blemish on the perfect picture. His faded olive military jacket was worn at the elbows, with crude patches. His jeans were bleached and torn at the knees. His shoes were worn out, the soles thin. His long gray hair was unkempt. A thick beard covered most of his weathered, lined face, but his eyes, those pale blue eyes, remained alert and bright, observing everything with strange attention. He moved slowly through the tables, his gaze sweeping the room. Everything felt both familiar and foreign at once. He stopped when he saw the piano. For a moment, his expression softened with memory, pain, and something deeper. Then he looked up, meeting the eyes of Victoria, who was still speaking. One guest noticed him first, nudging the person beside them. Whispers spread like ripples on water. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, within seconds. The entire room realized something was wrong. Victoria stopped mid-sentence, her face flushing with irritation. She called for security, her voice sharp as a razor. Two large men in black suits began moving from the corners of the room, advancing toward James with heavy, determined steps. But before they could reach him, James spoke. His voice was hoarse from days of little conversation, but still clear, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a blade. He said simply, "Excuse me." Everyone fell silent. The entire room, 150 people, turned to look at this homeless man. James wasn't looking at the security guards. He was looking straight at Victoria. He asked, "Can I play the piano in exchange for a meal?" For 3 seconds. No one spoke. The question was so bizarre, so unexpected, so audacious that people's brains needed time to process it. Then someone laughed, a short, sharp laugh, then another. Then the entire room exploded in mocking laughter. Someone bellowed from a nearby table, voice dripping with disgust, asking what he had just said. A woman whispered loudly, her voice full of concern, as if poverty were contagious, asking how he had gotten in. Victoria stepped down from the platform, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She stopped 3 steps away from James, looking down at him with ice-cold eyes. She told security to remove him immediately, her voice low and dangerous. But James didn't move. He just stood there, calm and steady, his gaze never leaving Victoria. And for one moment, just one fleeting moment, something crossed Victoria's face, a sense of unease, an unclear memory trying to surface. But then it vanished, and her cold expression returned. And so, the trap was set. Victoria Brennan wasn't someone who enjoyed being challenged. especially not in her own house, not on the most important night of the year. She moved closer to James. The distance between the wealthy and the destitute, never more apparent. She turned to address the crowd, her voice ringing clear. This, she said, was exactly what she had just been talking about. This hotel represented excellence, and this man represented failure. Some people in the crowd nodded, though a few looked down at their plates. Uncomfortable, Victoria continued, her voice like a sermon. Her father had taught her that there were two types of people in this world, those who create value and those who only beg for value from others, those who build and those who destroy, those who contribute and those who only take. She paused for effect, then pointed directly at James, asking the crowd which type they thought he was. Someone shouted that he was the failure type, and laughter erupted again. Victoria smiled coldly. She spoke of her father building Sterling Rose from nothing, working day and night, sacrificing everything to create this place. He had taught her about standards, about maintaining class. He had said that if you open the door to beggars, they'll swarm like ants. And he had been right. From one of the front tables, a middle-aged man in an expensive Italian suit stood up. Thomas Wright, a lawyer famous for winning cases through ruthlessness rather than justice. He declared that Mrs. Brennan was right. People like this man were a burden on society. He had seen hundreds of cases in court. They refused to work, refused to improve themselves, then demanded that hard-working people support them. He turned to James, eyes narrowing, asking if he could even read music, or if he could barely read letters at all. Laughter erupted again, louder and more cruel. An elegantly dressed woman with sparkling diamond jewelry stood up. Dr. Helen Morrison, a top surgeon who had saved countless lives, but seemed to have lost the ability to see humanity. She pointed out his trembling hands, suggesting it could be Parkinson's or alcohol or drug addiction. Either way, she said, he couldn't play anything. The piano was worth over $200,000. Just him touching it would ruin it. She laughed mockingly, asking if he even knew how many keys a piano had. 88, she said. But she'd bet he couldn't count to 10. From the back of the room, another voice rang out. Senator Robert Hayes, a politician running for re-election on a law and order platform. He declared they needed stricter laws to keep people like this in their place. They reduced property values and increased crime rates. The city would be far better without such elements. The crowd began adding their voices. Someone complained about the terrible smell. Someone asked who had let him in and who was responsible. Someone said the evening was ruined and demanded to know how much they had paid for this. But not everyone joined the collective cruelty. An elderly woman with neatly braided silver hair looked down at her plate, lips pressed tight. Patricia Monroe, widow of a veteran, knew what it felt like when a good person was treated like garbage. A young couple exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something was wrong but lacking the courage to speak up in this sea of people. And from the kitchen door, Marcus Chen watched with growing pain in his heart. He had once lived in the lower district. His family still lived there. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, as if you didn't matter, as if your life had no value, and he couldn't witness this anymore. Marcus stepped out from the kitchen, holding a plate of warm food roast meat, steamed vegetables, freshly baked bread. His hands trembled slightly, but he moved forward. He spoke up, his voice unsteady but determined, saying he thought they could give the man some food from the kitchen. They had plenty to spare. Victoria turned to him with cold, angry eyes, demanding to know what he was doing. Marcus swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. He suggested they could spare a bit of food, and Victoria cut him off, her voice like a whip. They had nothing for people like this. She said, if he helped him, he'd be fired immediately, no severance, no reference letter, nothing. She would ensure he never worked in the hotel industry again. Marcus stood frozen, the plate still in his hands, from the kitchen. The head chef was shaking his head vigorously, signaling Marcus to back down. This job was important. Marcus's family needed the money. Culinary school tuition wouldn't pay itself, and a threat from Victoria Brennan could destroy a career before it started. Marcus looked at James, at the plate of food, then at Victoria. Finally, his shoulders sagged. He whispered an apology and retreated, setting the plate on a nearby table. James looked at Marcus and spoke gently, his voice full of understanding. He told the young man it was okay, that he understood. He needed to survive and shouldn't risk everything for him. This unexpected kindness made Marcus feel worse than all the mockery. Tears welled up, and he quickly turned away. At another table, David Brennan, Victoria's 22-year-old son studying medicine, couldn't stay silent anymore. He stood up, his voice trembling but firm. He asked his mother if they couldn't just give the man a little food. They had so much, and he was only asking. Victoria turned to her son, her face flushing. She told David to sit down and not embarrass her in front of all these people. David hesitated, looking between his mother and James. Finally, he slowly sat down, but his face showed clear disagreement with what was happening. Victoria turned back to James, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. She had found the perfect game, a way to publicly humiliate this old man, to turn his pain into their entertainment. She raised her hands, requesting attention. She announced that she had a great idea. The room fell silent, everyone waiting. Victoria asked if he wanted food. Fine, she said. She'd give him a fair chance. He could entertain them, play the piano. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with mockery. A beggar wanted art. Then prove you're worthy. Prove you're not just trash from the streets. Laughter and cheers erupted. People were excited about this spectacle. Victoria announced the terms. If he could play one song, just one, without making a fool of himself, she would give him food and $500 cash. The crowd applauded, excited. Some people began pulling out their phones, ready to record. But, Victoria said, raising her finger, her eyes gleaming with malice, when he failed, and he would fail, he had to leave and never return. Security would have his photo. His name would go on a blacklist. He'd be banned from every upscale establishment in the city. He would have nothing left but shame. Guests began placing bets among themselves. Someone bet $100 he couldn't play for 10 seconds. Someone predicted he'd just sit there staring at the keys, not knowing where to start. Someone asked who wanted to bet on him crying, saying they thought he would cry. Victoria smiled triumphantly, feeling power surge through her. She asked if he accepted, or if he wanted to leave now with what little dignity remained. if he had any dignity at all. James stood still for a long moment. He looked at Victoria, at the eager crowd, then at the piano. His face remained expressionless calm, steady, unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. He said, "I accept." James Mitchell walked toward the piano. Each step left small wet marks on the gleaming marble floor, traces of someone who didn't belong here. The crowd was silent now, but it was the silence of people waiting for a show, not a performance. Some people held up their phones, fingers on the record button. They wanted to capture this moment, the moment the beggar failed, the moment they could post on social media with mocking captions. Victoria called from behind, her voice like honey laced with poison. She told him to be careful, not to scratch the surface. This piano was worth more than everything he'd ever seen in his life. Actually, she added, probably more than his entire life. Laughter erupted again. James didn't respond. He just continued forward. When he reached the piano, he stopped. He extended his hands, those rough, trembling hands, toward the glossy black surface. Everyone waited for him to leave dirty marks, sweat stains, marks of poverty on this perfect instrument. But when his fingers touched the first key, something miraculous happened. The trembling vanished. His hands suddenly became steady, confident, as if they had come home after a long exile, as if they were touching an old friend, a long-time lover. James sat on the piano bench. He adjusted the height with familiar ease, a professional movement that a few people in the crowd noticed but didn't understand. He placed his hands on the keys, unhurried. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply once, twice, 3 times. The room waited. 150 people held their breath. Then he pressed down. A single note. Clear, perfect, not clumsy, not hesitant, not the sound of an amateur trying his luck. This was the sound created by someone who understood a piano's breath, someone who knew the soul of music. The crowd was surprised. This wasn't what they expected. James began playing a melody. Simple, slow, sad. A wordless lullaby. No one recognized the piece because it was original, written from his own pain and memories. But the technique was undeniable. Each note fell with perfect precision. The timing was flawless, not a millisecond off. The dynamics were subtle soft, tender, full of emotion. The music didn't shout, it whispered. It spoke of empty rooms, of faded photographs and a torn wallet, of promises shattered like glass underfoot. It spoke of cold nights on sidewalks, of hunger not just for food but for hope, of becoming invisible in a crowd. This was the sound of loneliness but not despair. There was still dignity in this sorrow, still beauty in the pain. The atmosphere in the room began to change. Laughter faded, phones lowered. People began truly listening. Not to mock, but because they couldn't help it. At a front table, David Brennan felt his heart tighten. This music touched something deep inside the pain of his grandfather he'd never been able to articulate, the loss he'd never properly mourned. Tears began flowing, and he didn't try to hide them. Patricia Monroe, the widow sitting at a middle table, clutched a handkerchief in her hand. Her husband had come back from war different, haunted, broken. He had fought demons in his head for 15 years before surrendering. This music sounded like what he could never tell her. Her shoulders shook as she cried. From the kitchen door, Marcus Chen was smiling through tears. He knew it. His instinct had been right. This man was special, and now they were beginning to see. Victoria Brennan stood frozen. Champagne glass gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her controlled expression was cracking. Something about this music felt familiar. Not the piece itself, she'd never heard it before, but the way it was played, the way each phrase was shaped with such care, the way emotion was woven into every note. She had heard someone play like this before, long ago, when she was a child, but who, when James continued playing, and the music began to build. His left hand joined in with deep, resonant bass notes, creating a foundation. The melody became more complex, adding layers, and then for 15 seconds, he let a ray of his true skill slip through. His fingers began flying across the keys. Arpeggios cascaded up and down at dizzying speed. Counterpoint melodies wove together like golden threads in a tapestry. Trills, runs, octave jumps, all executed with perfect precision. This was virtuoso technique, concert pianist level, master level. The room gasped. Collectively, simultaneously. Someone breathed, "Oh my God." Someone else whispered, "Impossible." Lawyer Thomas Wright stood abruptly, mouth hanging open. Dr. Helen Morrison set down her wine glass with trembling hands, completely forgetting its existence. Senator Hayes stared, his face flushed with embarrassment. Victoria's champagne glass nearly fell. She whispered, "It can't be. That's just luck." But even she knew it wasn't luck. No one could fake this level of skill. No one could pretend mastery like this. Someone in the crowd, a retired piano teacher, stood with wide eyes. She said this was conservatory-level technique. It took decades to master. Who was this man? But James didn't answer. He had brought the music back down, returning to the simple, tender theme. The storm of notes became gentle rain, and in this simplicity, with all the power and skill displayed, there was restraint, artistry, wisdom. He played the final measures with infinite tenderness, like a prayer, like forgiveness offered to a cruel world, like a farewell to the past and a greeting to an uncertain future. The last note rang out, sustained by the pedal. Fading slowly into silence, James kept his hands on the keys, head bowed. A moment of perfect stillness. No one moved. No one spoke. For a full minute, the room remained in complete silence, but not the silence of discomfort or mockery. This was the silence of awe, of respect, of people confronting something beautiful and unexpected that they couldn't process. Then slowly, David Brennan stood up, tears streaming down his face. He began clapping. Not the polite applause of social obligation. This was applause from the soul, from recognition of beauty. Patricia Monroe stood up, also crying, also clapping. In the corner of the room, Judge Eleanor Price, a 65-year-old judge about to retire, rose slowly. A single tear ran down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She just clapped, eyes never leaving James, something in her memory struggling to surface. One person stood, then 5, then 10, then 50. Within 30 seconds, most of the room was standing, applauding. Not cheerful ovation, this was solemn applause, respectful applause, the applause of people who had witnessed something that changed them. Those not standing in Lawyer Wright sat motionless, staring at his hands, ashamed. Dr. Morrison looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Senator Hayes remained seated, face buried in his hands, and Victoria Brennan, standing frozen, not applauding, just staring at James as if he were a ghost. Marcus from the kitchen was clapping hard, tears of joy streaming. He kept saying, "I knew it. I knew he was special." James finally lifted his head, but he didn't stand, didn't bow. He just looked around the room with a calm, steady, sad gaze. Not triumphant, not gloating, just tired, quietly dignified, and infinitely lonely despite the applause. Because he knew the truth. They were applauding skill. But did they see the person? Would this change how they treated the next person like him? Or was this just a moment, an anomaly? And then the world would return to its comfortable cruelty. Only time would tell. But now, in this moment, something had shifted. Something that couldn't be undone. The applause gradually faded. But the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Those who had just mocked now stood in shameful silence. Those who had been contemptuous now couldn't look directly at James. David Brennan was the first to break the silence. He walked up to the piano, wiping tears from his cheeks, his voice trembling. He asked where the man had learned to play like that. James looked up at this young man with sincere eyes and a compassionate face. He smiled sadly. He said, "Here and there, son. Life teaches many things." Victoria stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. She told David to step back. She turned to James, trying to maintain a cold expression, but something was stirring inside. She said, "Fine. You played quite well." It was difficult for her to say quite well, an obvious understatement everyone recognized. She added not to be fooled by one lucky performance. One song didn't define a person. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Someone said, "Lucky. Did you just see that wasn't luck? That was true mastery." Someone else asked why Mrs. Brennan couldn't admit the truth. David spoke up, more forcefully. He reminded his mother that she had also promised $500. Victoria stiffened. She said it was just a joke. David interrupted, for the first time in his life publicly confronting his mother. He said no. She had stated it clearly, in front of everyone here. If he played well enough to make someone cry, she would give him $500. He turned to the crowd, asking how many people had cried. He counted at least 20. Victoria reluctantly pulled out her wallet, extracting a wad of cash, but holding it tightly as if it were burning her hands. She said this money meant nothing to people like him. People like him only wasted it on alcohol, drugs, or other worthless things. She knew his type. She'd seen many before. James stood up from the piano bench, his posture changing, his back straightened, shoulders squared. He was no longer a hunched man. He stood like a soldier, like someone with authority. He said quietly but firmly, "You're right." Everyone was surprised. He said, "I don't want your money." Victoria looked confused. She asked, "What?" "Why not?" James looked straight into her eyes. He said, "Because I didn't come here for money. I came here for a different reason." He paused meaningfully. "A reason that concerns you. Mrs. Brennan." Tension in the room spiked. Everyone leaned forward. Victoria's face showed alarm mixed with confusion. She asked what he meant, what he was talking about. Before James could answer, another voice rang out from the back of the room. Authoritative, clear, filled with barely controlled emotion. It was Judge Eleanor Price. and she said, "Excuse me." She was an elegant woman. Silver hair cut neatly short, wearing a dark suit. 65 years old, but still carrying an aura of power. She walked toward the piano, and the crowd automatically parted to let her pass. She said, "That song. I've heard it before." James turned, and when their eyes met, there was a moment of recognition. Painful, profound recognition. Judge Price continued, stepping closer, but not on the radio, not in any concert hall. "I heard it a very long time ago. Too long ago." She stopped, studying James's face intensely. "It's an original composition. Never published, never recorded." "How do you know it?" James met her gaze steadily. He said, "I didn't learn it." "Judge." He paused for effect. "I wrote it. 45 years ago." The room erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. People asked, "He's a composer 45 years ago. How can a homeless veteran be a composer?" Judge Price's face drained of color. Her lips moved, forming a name silently. She whispered, "No, it can't be." Her voice barely audible. James Mitchell." James nodded slowly. He said, "Hello, Judge Price." "It's been a long time." Judge Price staggered. Someone beside her quickly steadied her. Her hand covered her mouth. Tears starting. She said, "Oh God, oh my God." Confusion spread through the crowd. People asked, "Who is James Mitchell? Why is the judge reacting like that? Did they know each other?" Judge Price composed herself, turned to the crowd. Her voice shook but was clear. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you don't understand." She took a deep breath. This man, James Mitchell, was a legend in this city. She began telling the story. In the 1960s and early 70s, James Mitchell was the most renowned piano teacher. He taught at the conservatory. Many of his students became professional pianists, winning international competitions. He was called the maestro, the teacher of teachers. People pulled out their phones, searching. Someone found an article and read aloud. Renowned piano teacher James Mitchell disappears after Vietnam service. 1977. Mitchell, a prodigy who devoted his life to music and country, vanished after returning from military service. Colleagues and students mourned him as lost. The phone was passed around, showing a black and white photo of young James at a piano with students gathered around, smiling, alive with hope. People compared the photo to the man standing before them, older, weathered, worn by life, but undeniably the same person. Someone said, "My God, it really is him." Someone else asked, "He's been alive all this time." More searches revealed more. Someone said he had dozens of awards from music associations. His students won Grammy Awards, performed at Carnegie Hall. An article from 1972 called him Mitchell the Teacher, who changes lives through music. Victoria stood frozen, staring. Something was clicking in her memory. She whispered, "Mitchell, James Mitchell." Her voice barely audible, "Papa's teacher." A memory struck her with force. A little girl watching her father take a piano lesson. A kind teacher with a gentle smile, teaching her father, praising his progress, then teaching her. 7-year-old Victoria with pigtails. He had said, "Very good. Victoria, you have your father's talent." Back in the present, Victoria whispered, "You taught my father piano. It wasn't a question, it was a realization." She said louder, "You taught me too." She said, "You were Papa's teacher. You came to the hotel every week." James nodded slowly. Sadly, he said, "Your father was one of my best students, and you were so young but so eager. You had great potential. A sad smile crossed his face. He said you could have become a real pianist. But then, life changed everything. Victoria was reeling. Memories were flooding back more powerfully. The kind teacher, patient with her mistakes. The person who taught her about music, but also about kindness. The person her father respected and loved. She said, "But you vanished. Papa said you went to war and never came back. He thought you were dead. He mourned you. He said you were the person who saved him from depression through music." David interrupted. Eyes wide. He asked, "Wait, Grandpa's teacher, the one he always talked about?" He turned to Victoria, "Mom, you told me Grandpa had a teacher who changed his life, taught him music could heal souls. Was that you?" James looked at David and nodded. He said, "Your grandfather was a good man. He built this hotel not just as a business. He wanted it to be a place of beauty, of culture." He gave James a pointed look. "A place to welcome everyone who appreciated excellence. Everyone, not just the wealthy." Victoria flinched. The reality of her cruelty was hitting harder. She hadn't just mocked a homeless man, she had mocked her father's beloved teacher. She had violated everything her father stood for. Guest reactions shifted dramatically, from contempt to respect, from superiority to shame. Lawyer Wright sat heavily, head in his hands. Dr. Morrison was crying, not from beauty anymore, but from shame. Senator Hayes had his face buried, unable to look up. Marcus from the kitchen was watching with a mix of vindication and sadness at how close they had come to missing this, to destroying this beautiful soul without ever knowing. But questions remained. Big questions. People asked, why did he disappear? What happened after the war? How did a renowned teacher become homeless? All eyes turned to Judge Price, who clearly knew more. She stood rigid, face pale. She knew she had to speak. She knew she had to confess her greatest sin. Her voice was barely audible as she said, "And that's my fault." The room went silent again. Waiting. Judge Price said, "I destroyed him. I destroyed James Mitchell." Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "And I've been trying to find him for 40 years to apologize." Before Judge Price could say more, Victoria suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her forehead. Memories weren't just trickling back anymore. They were flooding, drowning her in images from the past. She swayed, and David rushed to steady his mother, asking if she was okay. But Victoria didn't hear him. She was lost in memory, transported back to 1977. She remembered herself as a little girl, 8 years old, wearing a pretty yellow dress, practicing piano in a small practice room on the 3rd floor of the hotel. She was practicing something called Victoria's Waltz, a song Mr. Mitchell had written especially for her. In her memory, she heard his voice saying, "You're doing very well." Victoria might remember. Music is about feeling. When you play, think about what makes you happy. Little Victoria was concentrating so hard, her tongue poking out slightly. She asked, "Like when Papa lets me help in the kitchen?" Mr. Mitchell laughed, warm and kind. He said exactly like that. Suddenly, in the memory, there was a smell of smoke, faint at first, then stronger. Little Victoria wrinkled her nose, asking if he smelled something. He sniffed, frowned, walked to the door and opened it. Smoke billowed in. An alarm started blaring, piercing and terrifying. His voice became urgent. He said, "Victoria, we have to go now." But the smoke grew thicker, filling the hallway. Flames were visible downstairs. Staff were shouting. Everything was chaos. Little Victoria was scared, starting to cry, asking where Papa was, saying she wanted Papa. Mr. Mitchell knelt down, wrapping his shirt around her face to protect her from the smoke. He said Papa was downstairs and was okay, but they had to find another way down. He told her to hold on to him tight and not let go. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest. He ran through smoke, through heat. Victoria was coughing, crying, clutching him. The world was spinning, frightening, hot. He kept saying, "You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." He found an alternate staircase and raced down. Finally, he burst out a side door into the night air. There were firefighters, ambulances everywhere. Victoria's father was running, tears streaming down his face. He was shouting, "Victoria, my daughter." Mr. Mitchell placed her in her father's arms. The father was sobbing, holding his daughter. He said, "James, you saved my little girl. I'll know that you risked your life." Mr. Mitchell's hands were burned. His face was black with soot. He was coughing hard. But he was smiling. He said, "She's my student. Of course I saved her." Victoria's father said, "I owe you everything, my entire life. Anything you need, ever, just ask." 1 week later, in the memory, Mr. Mitchell was in military uniform, saying goodbye. He was being deployed to a war zone. Little Victoria was crying, asking when he would come back. Mr. Mitchell knelt, handing her sheet music. He said, "Victoria's waltz. Keep it safe. Practice it. And remember, music teaches us about kindness, about seeing people's hearts." He tousled her hair. He said, "I'm always in the music you play." Little Victoria asked, "You'll come back?" Right, Mr. Mitchell's smile was sad. He said, "I'll try. Victoria, I'll try." Months later in the memory, her father told Victoria, tears in his eyes, "Mr. Mitchell won't be coming back. He's gone." The world lost a beautiful soul. Little Victoria was sad, confused, eventually, as children do. She forgot. Life moved on, back in the present. Victoria gasped as if surfacing from underwater. Tears streamed down her face. Her whole body was shaking. She whispered, "You saved my life." She looked at James with horror and heartbreak. She said, "The fire. 3rd floor. I was 8. You carried me through flames." She continued, "I remember now. I remember everything. You were my hero, and I just treated you like trash. I laughed at you. I called you worthless." Victoria's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, hands covering her face, sobbing. David knelt beside his mother, holding her, also crying. James looked down at her with infinite sadness. Not anger, not triumph, just sadness for lost time, lost connections, lost humanity. He said softly, "You forgot? You forgot the song? You forgot the lessons? You forgot what your father taught you?" The silence was heavy in the room. James spoke again. He said he wanted to play one more piece. If they would allow him. He wasn't asking Victoria, he was asking the room, respecting the community's agency. The room responded immediately, enthusiastically. People said, "Yes, please." "We would be honored, Victoria." Through tears, nodded frantically. James returned to the piano. He said quietly, "I wrote this piece a very long time ago. For a special little girl. A little girl I hoped would always remember that kindness matters more than money. That music connects us all." He looked at Victoria. He said, "But perhaps I didn't teach well enough. Perhaps one lesson wasn't sufficient." Victoria sobbed harder. She said, "No, it's my fault, not yours. James began to play Victoria's waltz. The opening notes were light, delicate, innocent. The waltz rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The sound of childhood wonder. The melody was like laughter in a spring garden. Each note danced like a butterfly on flowers. Pure joy, untainted by cynicism or pain. Victoria recognized it immediately. The piece she had practiced as a child. She placed her hands over her heart, crying harder. Then the music transitioned. The tempo quickened slightly. Minor keys entered, dissonance crept in. The bass notes became urgent, threatening. It was as if smoke was seeping into the melody. Notes stumbled, panic rising. The waltz became distorted, fear twisting beauty. It was the sound of danger, of a child, lost and alone. Everyone in the room tensed. They could hear the story. They could feel the fear. The music shifted again. Strong, decisive chords emerged. A hero theme appeared. The bass provided a foundation of strength and protection. The right hand played the rescued melody, lifted up to safety. Strength broke through the darkness. Powerful hands lifted the melody. Fear dissolved into protection. It was the sound of salvation, of love defeating death. Everyone understood. This was the rescue. Musically depicted. James was saving Victoria through sound. Then came the music's resolution. It returned to the waltz theme, but now with deeper harmony, bittersweet, beautiful but sad, an understanding that innocence, once lost, cannot fully return. The melody came back but carried the weight of experience. The childhood theme was played with adult understanding. It was love that saves, and goodbye that breaks hearts. The promise of a return that never came. Forgiveness offered in each note. The final measures became softer, slowing down. Each note was a farewell. Each chord was a benediction. The last note hung in the air like a question mark. Will you remember, will you change after it ended? There was absolute silence. Sacred silence. Nobody dared breathe. Victoria stood shakily, walked to the piano as if in a trance. She fell to her knees before James. She said, "You saved my life. Papa loved you. And I treated you like garbage." James looked down at her. He said, "You forgot the lesson. Your father built this hotel with love. You built it with cruelty." Victoria whispered, "Papa would be ashamed of me." "You're right. I became exactly what destroyed you." She looked up and asked, "What happened? Why did you end up like this? You were a hero, a renowned teacher. What happened?" James looked past her, at Judge Price. He said, "Ask her. Judge Price knows the story." All eyes turned to the judge. She had been standing frozen, tears streaming. She knew her moment had come. The confession she had rehearsed for 40 years, but never thought she would actually have to give. Judge Price stepped forward. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to tell you something. Something I've carried for 45 years. Something that has haunted me every day of my life." The room was absolutely silent. Everyone waited. The tension was unbearable. She said, "I am the one who destroyed James Mitchell. I am the reason he lost everything, and it is the greatest sin of my entire life." Judge Eleanor Price walked to the center of the room, hands clasped before her chest like a prisoner awaiting sentence. She looked at James first, then addressed the crowd. She began, "In 1977, I was 25 years old, fresh out of law school, a junior JAG officer in the military, ambitious, hungry for success, and willing to do anything to advance my career. She looked at James. She said James Mitchell served under my command after he returned from combat. Her voice cracked. She said he had seen horrible things in the war. He came back with PTSD, nightmares, struggling. But he still tried to serve honorably, tried to do the right thing. Judge Price continued, tears starting. She said there was a superior officer, Colonel Bradley Harrison, a cruel man who abused his power. He regularly harassed enlisted men, particularly the young and vulnerable ones. Everyone knew. No one dared speak. She said one day in August 1977, James witnessed the colonel physically beating a private, a 19-year-old boy named Jenkins. He had just been drafted, scared, homesick. The colonel was beating him for a minor mistake. James couldn't stand by. He intervened, pulled the colonel away. He told him, "Sir, this boy is just a child. This is wrong." The colonel turned his rage on James, started beating James. James defended himself, only defensively. Judge Price's voice grew stronger with pain. She said the colonel then filed a report. He accused James of insubordination and assault, claimed James attacked him without provocation, claimed James was mentally unstable from PTSD. He fabricated the entire story. The case came to me. I was the JAG officer in charge, and her voice broke completely. I knew the truth. Private Jenkins came to me, told me everything. 2 enlisted men witnessed it, willing to testify. The evidence was clear. The colonel was lying. She paused, tears streaming. She said, but Colonel Harrison had connections. He was the son of a general. He promised that if I ruled in his favor, my career would be secured. I would be promoted, fast-tracked to a judge position. The room gasped. Horror spread through the crowd. Judge Price said, and God forgive me, I buried the evidence. I threatened the witnesses, told them they would be court-martialed if they testified. Private Jenkins, terrified, withdrew his testimony. I ruled in favor of the colonel. James Mitchell was dishonorably discharged. He lost all military benefits, lost his pension, VA health care, GI Bill, lost his reputation. Her voice rose with anguish. I destroyed a good man to advance my own career. Reactions rippled around the room. Horror, disgust, sympathy. Senator Hayes recognized the political corruption he was witnessing. Dr. Morrison recognized system failure. Lawyer Wright recognized legal injustice. Judge Price continued. The dishonorable discharge destroyed him. The conservatory fired him immediately. They didn't want the scandal. Students were pulled by their parents. His wife couldn't handle the stigma. She left him, took their daughter. He lost his apartment, his savings, everything. He tried to find work. No one would hire him. A dishonorable discharge is like a scarlet letter. His PTSD without treatment worsened, depression, nightmares, and slowly, he vanished onto the streets. Judge Price's voice softened. She said 5 years later, in 1982, Colonel Harrison was dying. On his deathbed, he confessed the truth to his father. The general came to me, furious. I had to confess my role. The general helped me overturn the verdict. We got James's discharge changed to honorable. We restored his benefits, pension, back pay, but we couldn't find James. He had disappeared completely. She said I searched for 40 years, hired investigators, checked shelters, hospitals, every homeless veteran program. Sometimes I heard rumors. A homeless man who plays piano beautifully, but I could never confirm it. 2 weeks ago, Someone told me. A homeless veteran at the Sterling Rose keeps asking to play the piano. I came tonight hoping, praying it was James, so I could finally. She couldn't finish. Sobbing. Judge Price reached into her briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope with trembling hands. She walked to James, extended it to him. She said, "James, Mr. Mitchell, this is the official paperwork. Your discharge status honorable, full military honors restored, Medal of Valor for defending Private Jenkins." She opened the envelope, showing the contents. She said, 45 years of back pension, with interest. The check was visible. The amount made people gasp. $1.2 million. Everything you should have received. Also, she said full VA benefits restored for life. Health care, mental health services, housing assistance, education benefits you can transfer. Judge Price knelt before James, an elderly judge on her knees before a homeless veteran. She said, "I cannot give back 45 years. Cannot give back your wife, your daughter, your career. Cannot erase the pain, the cold nights, the hunger. But I offer this," and her voice broke, "and I beg your forgiveness every day for 40 years. I thought about you. Every case I judged fairly was to honor the injustice I committed against you. I became a judge to make up for destroying justice for you. But no matter how many right decisions I made, I could never erase that one terrible wrong." James was silent. He looked down at the judge, at the envelope. His expression was unreadable. The room held its breath. Would he forgive? Would he rage finally? James spoke. His voice was quiet, not angry. He said, "Stand up, Judge Price, please." The judge stood, shaking. James looked into her eyes. A long moment passed. He said, "I forgive you." The room gasped. People asked what. After all she did? James continued for 45 years. "You've carried this guilt. You became a good judge, helped countless people. You tried to find me to make amends. Colonel Harrison was the evil one. You were young, scared, made a terrible choice. But you spent your entire life trying to atone." James took the envelope. He said, "I accept this, not because I need the money, but because accepting it releases you from the debt. You have suffered enough." He held out his hand, a handshake offer. The judge stared, disbelieving, slowly. She extended her hand. They shook. Then James pulled her into an embrace. Both were crying. The judge sobbed into James's shoulder, saying, "Thank you." "I'm so sorry," James said. I know, and I forgive you. Truly." The judge pulled back. She said, "You are a better person than I deserve." James said, "We're all just trying to survive. Some of us have easier paths, that's all." After the embrace, Victoria was still kneeling, watching. A realization dawned on her. If he could forgive the judge? Maybe. Victoria approached James with slow, uncertain steps. David followed, supporting his mother. She stopped before James. She tried to speak but couldn't find words. Finally, she said, "You saved my life, and I treated you like garbage. I deserve to be hated." Her confession poured out. She said, "You taught me kindness. Papa taught me compassion through your example, and I forgot everything. I became exactly what destroyed you. I became the cruel system." Victoria looked around the room. She said, "We sat here in luxury, planning to destroy the homes of poor people, laughing at someone who sacrificed for this country." She looked at James. She asked the lower district, where I wanted to demolish. "That's where you live." James nodded. Victoria said, I was going to destroy your home. To build more rooms for people like me, people who have everything but appreciate nothing. Marcus stepped forward. He said, Mrs. Brennan, the lower district is where I grew up. My family still lives there. 300 families would lose their homes. You said they were obstacles to progress, but they're just people trying to survive. Victoria was crushed by the weight of it all. Everything she had built was built on cruelty. Everyone she had hurt had been invisible to her. Her own son was disappointed in her. Her father's legacy was betrayed. James helped Victoria stand. He said Victoria. It was the first time he used her first name. Familiar and kind, like when she was a child. He said, You're not a villain, you just forgot. We all forget sometimes. Life makes us build walls instead of bridges. Your father taught you piano to teach compassion. Music is about feeling what others feel. When you play a sad song, you understand sadness. That's the point, empathy. You forgot this lesson, but tonight, you remembered. That's what matters. Not that you forgot, but that you remembered. He offered forgiveness. He said, I forgive you. Victoria, just as I forgave the judge. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding anger hurts me more than it hurts you, and because I believe you can change. Victoria said, I don't deserve forgiveness. James said, forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about choosing healing over hatred. Choose, Victoria, who do you want to be? Victoria wiped her tears, stood straighter. A decision was visible in her eyes. She turned to face the crowd. She said, Ladies and gentlemen, I need to announce something. She took a deep breath. She said, effective immediately. The lower district project is canceled. We will not demolish those homes. Instead, Sterling Rose will fund renovations. We'll make the homes better, not destroy them. Murmurs spread, some approving, some shocked. Victoria continued. Sterling Rose will hire veterans, formerly homeless individuals, people from the lower district, full salary, benefits, and job training. We'll create a partnership with the VA for veteran services, a scholarship fund at the conservatory, the James Mitchell Scholarship, for disadvantaged students who love music, and I personally will volunteer. I'll teach piano to anyone who wants to learn, rich or poor, housed or homeless. Because Papa taught me, and Mr. Mitchell taught Papa. It's time I pass it on. She turned to James. She said, You have money from the judge now, but I offer something else. A suite at Sterling Rose. Yours for life, free of charge, and a position music director. Teach students, perform, share your gift, help me rebuild what Papa created. Not a hotel of exclusion, but of community. If you accept, you'll help me learn again. Help me be the person Papa wanted me to be. James considered this. A long pause. Finally, he said, I accept. The room erupted in genuine applause. Not mockery this time, but celebration. David hugged his mother. Marcus clapped hard, tears of joy streaming. Judge Price smiled through her tears. Victoria turned to Marcus. She said, Mr. Chen, you showed courage tonight. You tried to help when it was dangerous. You're promoted to executive chef and full scholarship to Culinary Institute. The hotel will sponsor your education. Marcus was stunned. He said, Mrs. Brennan, I thank you. Victoria said, thank you for having a conscience when I didn't. James approached Marcus. He said, Marcus, thank you. When everyone laughed, You tried to help. Kindness when it's dangerous. That's true courage. He handed Marcus a business card. He said, "A former student of mine owns a restaurant. The best in the city. I'll call him. You'll have an externship opportunity." Marcus bowed respectfully. He said, "I won't let you down." "Sir?" David approached Victoria. He said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." "For real?" Victoria said I should have listened to you. You were right. Your generation is better than mine. David said we learned from your mistakes, but now you're learning too. They embraced. The mother-son relationship was restored. Judge Price and James had a private moment by the piano. The judge asked, "How did you survive all those years without becoming bitter?" James said, "I was bitter for many years, but anger is heavy. Carrying it made survival even harder. So I let it go, piece by piece. Music saved me. When I had nothing else, I had melodies. Music never left me." The judge said, "I'll spend the rest of my life making the system better. So what happened to you never happens again." James said, "That's all I ask. Justice for the next person." They shook hands as equals now, a brief embrace, healing tears. 1 week passed. The Sterling Rose Ballroom remained the same space, but the atmosphere had completely changed. James was at the piano, properly dressed, clean, dignified. He was teaching. Students gathered around him. Victoria sat beside him, taking notes like a child. David was learning too. Marcus watched from a break between kitchen shifts. There was a mix of ages and backgrounds. All were equal at the piano. James was teaching. He said music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. When you play, you speak to hearts, rich or poor. Everyone's heart speaks the same language. Victoria was playing simple scales, rusty and humble, but eager to relearn. James corrected her gently. He said, "Good. Victoria, remember, gentle touch." The piano responds to kindness, just like people, beyond this teaching moment. Other changes were taking place throughout the hotel, in various corners of the ballroom. Other activities flourished. Job training sessions were underway for lower district residents. A VA counselor met with veterans, helping them navigate benefits and find housing. Former homeless individuals toured the facility, learning about new employment opportunities in kitchen, maintenance, and guest services beyond the windows. Construction crews worked on the lower district, not demolishing, but renovating, fixing roofs, painting exteriors, installing new plumbing and electrical systems. The project had been renamed Sterling Rose Community Initiative, Rebuilding Together. Families who had feared losing their homes now worked alongside hotel staff and volunteers to improve their neighborhood. Marcus brought out food, setting it on tables throughout the ballroom. Not for exclusive guests, but for everyone, workers taking a break, students between lessons, veterans meeting with counselors, staff on lunch breaks, all eating together. A community meal where housing status didn't determine your seat. The Sterling Rose Hotel had changed its motto, where the brass plaque once read, "Excellence for the deserving." It now simply said, "Everyone welcome." James sat at the piano alone briefly, his students having taken a short break. He rested his hands on the keys and spoke, as if addressing everyone who would ever hear this story. He said, "I didn't come that night for food. I had eaten. I came for a different reason, to remind myself, and maybe you, of something we forget too easily. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. The homeless veteran on the corner might have saved lives. The person you dismiss might be the one who once saved you. The individual you mock might teach your children someday. We're all one bad day away from losing everything. One accident, one illness, one cruel boss, one unjust system, one moment of bad luck, and everything changes. It happens faster than you think. I was a renowned teacher one day, homeless the next. But we're also one act of kindness away from getting it back. Marcus tried to help, and it mattered. David spoke up, and it mattered. The judge spent 40 years atoning, and it mattered. Victoria chose to change, and it changed everything. Music taught me that. Music is made of individual notes, some high, some low, some loud, some soft, alone. They mean little together. They create something beautiful. We are those notes. We need each other, rich and poor, housed and homeless, powerful and powerless. When we play together, when we see each other as human beings, we create something beautiful. Tonight, this room was transformed, not because of me, but because people chose to see, really see, and then chose to change. That choice is available to all of us, every single day, in small ways and large ways. The question is, will you choose it? Thank you for listening to my music and to my story. 1 year later, the lower district stood renewed. Families who once faced demolition now lived in renovated homes. Their children playing in newly built parks and community gardens. Crime had dropped by 30%. High school graduation rates had climbed. The neighborhood had become a model for compassionate urban development. Marcus Chen graduated from culinary school with honors and returned to run the Sterling Rose Kitchen. He now trained young chefs from underprivileged backgrounds, offering them the same opportunity Victoria had given him. 3 of his students had already opened their own restaurants. David Brennan opened a free clinic in the lower district, treating veterans and homeless individuals with the same care and respect he gave paying patients. He partnered with the VA to provide mental health services, helping dozens of veterans get the treatment they desperately needed. Judge Eleanor Price dedicated her remaining years on the bench to reviewing cases of military injustice. She helped 47 wrongfully discharged veterans restore their honor and access their benefits. When she retired, she founded a nonprofit legal organization continuing this work. Victoria Brennan taught piano every Tuesday and Thursday evening to anyone who wanted to learn. Regardless of their ability to pay, her students ranged from 8 to 80 years old, from homeless to wealthy, under her guidance. 2 students won scholarships to prestigious conservatories, and James Mitchell, once invisible on these same streets, now conducted a community orchestra where former homeless musicians played alongside conservatory students and amateur enthusiasts. Their concerts were free and open to all. The waiting list to join stretched 6 months long. The Sterling Rose Hotel became known not for exclusivity, but for inclusion, not for who it kept out, but for who it welcomed in. This story is fiction. But James Mitchell represents thousands of veterans who struggle every day, according to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Over 37,000 veterans experience homelessness on any given night in America. Many are talented, educated, heroic individuals who fell through cracks in our system. Behind each number is a person, a story, a life that matters. Sometimes, all it takes is seeing someone, really seeing them. Not their circumstances, not their appearance, not their housing status, but their humanity, their worth, their inherent dignity as a human being. If this story touched your heart, carry its message with you. The next time you pass someone on the street, remember you don't know their story. You don't know what they've survived, what they've sacrificed, what gifts they possess. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves a second chance. Every person deserves to be seen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being someone who believes every person has value. Now go, create your own symphony of kindness